Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show. Last week's surprise announcement by Prime Minister Boris Johnson that the Department for International Development would be merged with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office was met with widespread outrage. I'll be speaking about the fallout with social political campaigner Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas. And calls to improve the diversity of patient populations in clinical trials have grown since the COVID-19 health emergency. I'll be speaking with Shalom Lloyd and Dr. Tina Barton of Emerging Markets Quality Trials about their aims to bridge the gap between the pharmaceutical industry and Africa. Then later, I'll be reporting on some of this week's noteworthy company news. Before those discussions, here's our business correspondent Simon Pusey with a breakdown of the biggest business stories trending in Britain this week. Simon, so the 4th of July, not just going to be celebrated in America this year?
No, it's a big landmark date here now as well, because the Prime Minister has announced that, a whole raft of new changes are going to come in. They're going to sort of free people up a lot more than they have been. And we've had over the last few weeks a kind of easing of lockdown rules, but this seems to be one of those big dates which everyone's sort of looking forward to. And what it is really is, for a lot of English people, is called pubs. Pubs is the word that people, the really watchword here. And it's important to mention that this is for England, not Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. It is the pubs and restaurants will be allowed to open. So on the 20th of March, an eon ago now, but 3 months ago, they were all told to close. Well, now they can reopen in terms of having walk-in customers go in. Now, one of the main reasons that this can happen is that the government have moved back from 2 metres of social distancing, which we see on signs everywhere in London and the UK, to 1 metre. And that's really helped those kind of companies, restaurants and pubs, which is really hard to keep 2 metres away from anyone. They can now reopen. So that's the 4th of July. Then accommodation, hotels, another one that really struggled with 2 metres. They're also going to be allowed to reopen. They were never actually told that they should close, but it's just really hard to be able to open up with a 2 metre distancing guideline. And that 1 metre rule is across the country. So on public transport, instead of having to try and keep 2 metres, again, very hard on the sort of trains and the tubes and the buses, that's going to be 1 metre. And it also goes for sort of theatres and museums and galleries. No live performances is going to be allowed, but they can do pre-recorded ones, and they can have the restaurants and the bars open in them. So it's going to feel a lot more normal come the 4th of July. Another thing to mention is shielding. 2.2 million people in England have been shielding. Those are the people with the sort of the most vulnerable, the eldest, and people with underlying health issues. Well, they don't have to self-isolate this is going to be from the 6th of July. So 2.2 million people will be allowed to go outside and interact outside. And then from the 1st of August, they will then no longer need to isolate at all. So that's really important for them, because that's been the hardest hit, obviously, that community, in terms of the people that have been staying in, feeling really cut off from the outside world. Places of worship also going to be allowed to open, but not for live sort of services or weddings will have to take place outside. So it looks like, there's a bit more normality coming. The main thing for people in England, pubs.
Got to ask you quickly before you go, Simon, in terms of business, are we expecting it to be, a typical Saturday night that we would see this time last year on British high streets on the 4th of July?
Well, I think what you saw in previous sort of easing of restrictions is that everyone gets very excited, especially on that first day, and things are booked up and people are sort of ready to go out and go to pubs and go to restaurants. It's going to be, we're really in unknown territory in terms of whether this will sustain, and also how many people are still a bit afraid about going close to people, because generally we've seen the tendency has been that younger people are up for sort of seeing each other again and socialising, but maybe the older people or the people who've been indoors for slightly longer may still be a bit unsafe. So, obviously the hospitality industry is really hoping that everyone's going to come out in their masses and there's going to be business as usual. But it's hard to see that happening exactly the same way, especially with all these new restrictions that are still in place. The 1 metre thing is just one, but there's also, hand washing facilities and screens are going to have to be up and things like that. So it's unknown territory for the hospitality industry.
Absolutely. We'll wait to see on Sunday morning, won't we? Simon Pusey, thank you. Now, over to our first discussion. Last week, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a surprise announcement to MPs that he would be merging the Department for International Development with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Downing Street is facing growing anger from staff at Difford, some of whom accuse the government of exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic by pushing through his long-term goal. The move has also been criticised by 3 former prime ministers. The department was formed in 1997 and employs about 3,500 staff. Plans for the new department, to be called the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, is due to be set up by September.
Faced with this crisis today and the opportunities that lie ahead, we have a responsibility to ask whether our current arrangements, dating back to 1997, still maximise British influence. Those well-intentioned decisions of 23 years ago were right for their time. They paved the way for Britain to meet the UN target of spending 0.7% of national income on aid, a goal that was achieved by the coalition government in 2013 and has been maintained. They went silent at that bit, didn't they? And has been maintained ever since, including this year, and which remains our commitment. Yet those judgments date from a relatively benign era when China's economy was still much smaller than Italy's, and the West was buoyed by victory in the Cold War. We must now strengthen our position in an intensely competitive world by making sensible changes. And so I have decided to merge DFID with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to create a new department, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And this will unite our aid with our diplomacy and bring them together in our international effort. The Foreign Secretary will be empowered to decide which countries receive or cease to receive British aid while delivering a single UK strategy for each country, overseen by the National Security Council, which I chair. Those strategies will be implemented on the ground by the relevant ambassador, the relevant UK ambassador, who will lead all of the government's work in the host country.
For more on this, I'm now being joined by social political campaigner, Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas. Councillor Fajana-Thomas, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Most were shocked at Prime Minister Boris Johnson's pretty surprising last-minute announcement saying that he would be merging the DFID office with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and it has caused a lot of outcry. What was your first reaction?
Oh, my first reaction, like many other people, I wasn't shocked at all, but I was disappointed. Not shocked in the sense that we are talking about Boris Johnson and we are talking about a prime minister and a government that tackling poverty and inequality does not make much to them. And the old reasoning behind the establishment of DFID was tackling inequalities and poverty around the world. So it doesn't make any sense to whether UK is tackling inequality or not around the world. It doesn't make it's not a big deal to this government. So, but importantly, the select committee, the International Development Select Committee advised against this. And this is a cross-party body with both the Conservative, the Labour Party and other MPs within that body. So it was disappointing that the UK can do such a thing. And personally, as a UK politician, I felt disappointed and ashamed.
Thank you, Sister Susan there. Some observers have said that this is purely about budget. DFID, we're getting more budget than the Foreign Commonwealth Office. It doesn't make sense. Can you understand that sentiment?
Yes, I do. I do believe it's partly about budget. This government, in terms of tackling COVID-19, they have been spending and pumping a lot of money into tackling COVID-19. But parallelly, as we speak, they are having rapid discussion on where and how to start tackling and recouping money and looking at the budget. So this is a way part of the way of looking at the budget and the level of contraction the UK will see because of the money, the fund we have spent in tackling COVID-19.
Yes, clearly they've spent billions, and it's set to rise greatly, isn't it? We can't deny, Susan, that there were so many people that were celebrating this. Most of them are Brexit supporters, and I'm not sure if you realised it, but I was surprised that Monday this week was actually the 4th-year anniversary of the Brexit referendum. It has been 4 years, and there are some people saying that, you know, this office was a Tony Blair vanity project, that it was time to go. Most of the people that work in the department are overpaid, and lots of this money, where it was going to, we haven't seen any benefits from it.
People that are celebrating, actually, I don't know why they will be celebrating, because this is a department that enhances the UK reputation around the world. What this government has done diminishes the reputation of this country around the world. Why somebody would be celebrating withdrawal from tackling inequality, poverty around the world is beyond my understanding. Majority of NGO or majority of projects that this department supports around the world is not actually about the money. Many of these organizations, they're supporting them to build capacity in terms of the scheme, tackling poverty, getting young women back into education, and promoting sanitation, good drinking water around the world. They are helping many of these schemes around the world without even giving them any funding. All those, I don't know how that would be coordinated by now, making this probably just a little a small department within the foreign office. It is appalling.
Well, there's many people that agree with you. I haven't really heard much response from the international community, and I'm quite surprised by that because, of course, you know, Britain is a P5 country. It sits on that table, doesn't it, with the United Nations, and it is a G7 nation. Would you have expected to hear more from the international community, perhaps even from the Foreign Office in Nigeria, talking about the importance of DFID, urging the government to maybe change their decision?
I think it is some of these countries or some of the people DFID were supporting around the world, they were shocked, and I'm sure many of these organizations, many of these countries will be coming forward to comment on this. But having said that, I'm not too sure if you're aware that in the UK, over 200 NGOs that work, though UK-based, but work around the world, have sent a strong letter, a very firm letter to the Prime Minister, urging him to change his mind, urging him to reverse this decision. I think the international community might have been relying on these UK-based organizations and thinking, since they are doing something, since they are pursuing it with the government of the UK, let's see what happens.
Gosh, well, it is a major story, isn't it, Councillor Susan Fojana-Thomas, and one that's gone right under the carpet because there are so many other pressing issues that the British government and governments across the globe are facing. But Sister Susan Fojana-Thomas, Councillor, thank you so much for your time and for joining me on Channel's Business Global. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Shalom Lloyd and Dr. Tina Barton of Emerging Markets Quality Trials. But before then, here's some company news. The former CEO of German payment service provider Wirecard was arrested earlier this week, accused of inflating the company's balance sheet in an accounting scandal that centres on a missing sum of 1.9 billion euros. Marcus Braun, who last week resigned from the firm, is accused of inflating the company's balance sheet and revenue using incomes from businesses with third-party acquirers. Wirecard AG was once regarded as the star of the growing financial technology sector. The UK-based sandwich shop Pret a Manger has revealed that sales have plunged by up to 85% during the coronavirus crisis, raising fears about job cuts. Although Pret has reopened more than 300 stores in the UK, they're only offering takeaway, and the firm is trialling a click and collect service so customers can avoid queuing when demand returns. In a leaked video cited by the BBC, boss Pano Cristal told staff that an announcement about the job situation would be made on the 8th of July. Now over to our next discussion. Calls to improve the diversity of patient populations in clinical trials have grown since the COVID-19 health emergency. Although clinical trials are often performed throughout different parts of the world, often their demographic makeup, the gender, age and race of participants has a certain kind of uniformity. This underrepresentation of groups can lead to devastating social economic disparities. For more on this, I'm being joined by Shalom Lloyd and Dr. Tina Barton of the Emerging Markets Quality Trials, a research and consultancy firm bridging the gap between the pharmaceutical industry and Africa. Shalom Lloyd and Dr. Tina Barton, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. It's actually nice to have a remote interview with two individuals in the same location at the same time. What you are doing with EMQT is so important, and I must stress that it isn't just an issue that affects Africans in Africa. We've also seen this issue being raised by clinicians who are in the United States and are worried about the exclusion of African Americans in some clinical trials. Tell me the importance of doing this, raising this awareness, and what the consequences are of not having this diversity.
So maybe I can take that question. I think it's really important that we look at all the different ethnic groups in clinical trials. And as you rightly say, it was noted last year by the FDA, in fact, that the number of Black people that are in clinical trials is only about a fifth of the numbers that are actually there in the world. And so we're not seeing the diversity in clinical trials that we should expect to see. And so now it's been mandated that that diversity has to be addressed in clinical trials. And so now, not just for Black Americans, but for Black people around the world, they should be given that opportunity to get involved and to have their voice heard.
It seems like a pretty simple question, Shalom, but why? Why have Black people been excluded for so long?
I don't think it's something that was done knowingly or on purpose. I just think that if you look at the history of the journey of clinical trials, once ICA-GCP was in place, it was typically in North America, in Western Europe, Australia. And as the pharmaceutical industry started to look for more access to patients, I think it was in the early 1990s, Central Eastern Europe became that emerging market. And once that happened, in the 2000s, the emerging market became Latin America, Asia. And now it's Africa's turn. Africa is the rising billion. We do have a lot of treatment-naive patients in Africa. We have, access to the millions and millions of patients and can actually bring the miracles of medicines into Africa to people who wouldn't have typically had access to cancer treatments, etc. So now is that time. And I think it's just part of that general journey.
It's interesting that you say the miracle of medicine. It is a miracle. And sometimes, when you're in the UK like us, you can forget just how miraculous these drugs can be. What has been the response to your research and your proposal, I presume?
We have been so well received. If you think about EMQT and what we're doing, we see ourselves as the bridge between pharmaceutical industry and Africa. So typically we have two partners. We have the pharmaceutical companies who are actually really eager and looking to run trials and include African patients. When it comes to Africa, they're a bit worried and a bit cautious, really, wanting to do things right. And when you look at the clinicians, investigators, doctors in Africa, they're so hungry for this to happen and to be able to give them the opportunity to play on the global platform. So we're being well received by the two sort of partners that we're working with at the moment, and we're really pleased with that.
Talking about being well received by key actors and stakeholders, what about the masses? Because I'm sure you've seen it, Dr. Tina and Shalom. I certainly have. There have been so many memes and fake news stories going around on WhatsApp and Twitter, basically, demanding that governments stop using Africans as guinea pigs for what some masses would say are, a debilitating drugs. Do you think there's been a loss of confusion, or the message has been lost in translation somehow? Or is there any truth to these conspiracy theories?
I think it's a whole mixture of those things, actually. I think if you think about clinical trials in their truest sense, we're all guinea pigs. But the thing about clinical trials is that they're done in a very controlled and regulated way. So you're being looked after much, much more frequently than you would be if you just weren't in a clinical trial. So things happen more often, you see the doctor more often, you get more attention, you have more assessments, and so you're very carefully looked after. And so, yes, in a way it is a guinea pig, but it's done in such a way that it benefits you, and you get that opportunity to have a potentially life-saving medicine before anyone else gets the chance to do it. So it's really good, and people just need to understand that. They don't understand it. It's always been very badly advertised.
There's also another angle where, Julian, I think, we all know there's the two French doctors who suggested trials of vaccines in African patients. Africa is not a testing ground. What we do need is education. So I can understand where the conspiracy theories come in. But what we do need is actually to educate people, empower people with information. All of us have taken medicines for different illnesses, whether it be diabetes, any cardiovascular disease, etc. How do you think these drugs came to market? They were tested on someone. So for me, I think is taking the leaf out of the book of the Japanese, really, where the Japanese do something we call bridging studies. And what that means is they will not market a drug that has not been tested on their population, which I think is a good way to go.
It is a really good way to go. And as you say, education is key and is really vital there. We're running out of time, ladies. Half an hour on the show is just so short. But I've got to ask before you go, and one can only presume that the COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated your calls. How have things changed due to COVID?
I think there's been a massive change. There's been a real interest. For me, it's like this is a truly global pandemic, and it interestingly affected the Western world before Africa. So, we all know about things like Ebola, HIV, Lassa fever. There's something that happens in Africa that doesn't matter to us in the Western world. This one's been different. It's truly global, and we got hit first, and now it's moving sadly to those other areas of the world. We're seeing the numbers there go up. It's something for me that is scientifically fascinating. If you look at the data from the UK, Public Health England and the Office for National Statistics here in the UK have said Black people are nearly twice as likely to die in England and Wales from this disease. But if you look at the data that's now coming out of Africa, the numbers are very different. The number of deaths are much lower. You're getting cases. So, for example, in Nigeria, they've reported 23,000 cases, but they've only had 525 deaths. I think it's really interesting scientifically, and therefore there is an argument you should really focus on Black people with this disease in Africa. What is different about them when they get this dreadful disease? They're managing to survive it. Is it nature? Is it nurture? What is it about living here in the UK that makes the Black population more susceptible to the worst outcome from this disease?
Absolutely.
Not just in Nigeria, though. We're working in Congo at the moment. They reported about 1,000 cases, about 37 deaths. Cameroon, Ghana, a lot of cases, but fewer deaths. So you can see a trend across Africa. So it's something that needs to be looked at.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tina Barton, Shalom Lloyd, for Emerging Markets Quality Trial. You raised some questions there, which goes to show, you know, there is evidence for why this research and this partnership between Africa and the pharmaceutical industry is absolutely vital. Thank you so much for joining me. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.